Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Dame Angela. And I also want to pay tribute to the member for Kingston upon Hull North and the father of the House, member for Worthing West, for securing this really important and vital debate and for their work in fighting for justice for those affected by contaminated blood scandal. I know that all members who've made important contributions today campaign tirelessly on behalf of affected constituents to get them the justice that they deserve. And I'd like to pay tribute to all of them and other members who weren't able to join us today for their tireless work on keeping pressure on the government and to deliver for the victims of this scandal. The member for Llanelli highlighted that so many people have been waiting for decades and the fact that we have seen over 300 children die of AIDS. And we need to look at how we can help those children who are still living with this condition. The member for the Central Ayrshire highlighted her medical experience and why this is so important, and the treatment that we've seen over the years in spotting that contaminated blood is so vital. But what about the people who were contaminated before this medical breakthrough came through? The member for Wirral West highlighted her constituent's case and how this is a long and upsetting and depressing process. And we have to remember that people are still living with this mentally. They are suffering on a daily basis. You think about the fact that so many of these people during the lockdown, what the mental toll this took on their mental health. Every day that this compensation is delayed is another day that they are suffering. The member for Southport highlighted the fact that we have to think about the carers. A number of our members highlighted this. The people who cared for their family members, their loved ones. Where's their voice and where's the justice for them in this? And no amount of money will ever bring back the fact that many people have had to bury their children. We have to remember the children in this. And this was highlighted eloquently by the member for Wansbeck, who brought his passion and reminded us that for all the statistics we have around this scandal, we are talking about people. We are talking about real lives. We are talking about the lives who continue to be impacted on a daily basis about this. And the member for Newport East highlighting her work and the work of the fantastic voluntary and charity groups who support the many families affected by this. We have to remember, even within the financial constraints they face, they still do a fantastic job supporting the many families up and down the country. I'd also like to pay tribute to some of those other organisations in group. The Haemophilia Society, Hepatitis B Positive Trust, Hepatitis C Trust, the Sickle Cell Society, and the families of thousands of people up and down the country who continue to help raise awareness, who've contributed to this inquiry, and who continue to fight for justice over the past few years and decades. Now, Dame Angela, this is my first debate in this chamber representing the opposition front bench, but it's also something that I take a deep personal interest in. My late mother suffered from a disease called sickle cell anemia, and I'm a sickle carrier. And as a result of this disease, my mum required regular blood transfusions. And these transfusions were vital to her life. And without those transfusions, my mum's life would have ended a lot earlier. My mum died when she was 60. But those transfusions helped ease in her sickle pain and make sure that she was able to see me and my sisters grow up, so her first grandchild, and be able to live a life. And it's vital that today all blood is screened to avoid the risk of transmitting serious infections. And I'm pleased that this has actually helped more people come forward to give vital blood. Every so often I get a ping from NHS Blood in terms of that call out for people to come forward and give blood. So it's vital that we have people coming out to give blood and knowing that blood will be safe. I'm happy to give way to the father of the house.
She made very important points. But she reminds me that it was only 2 weeks ago that in the Jubilee Room around the corner from where we're debating now, there was a plea for people, especially ethnic minorities, to come forward and register for donations of blood and of potential organs as and when they don't need them all. And I hope that she would let me agree with her that it's very important people are actually aware of the importance of being donors and of the gift of receiving donations.
Thank you, and I totally agree with the father of the house on this. It's so important. We saw that, like I said, every so often, we get the ping from NHS Blood, and one of the things that we tried to call for at that NHS blood donation was to have a bus in Parliament and actually get more people and parliamentarians to give blood. And through This thorough screening of blood has come alongside the emergence of synthetic clotting factors for haemophilia sufferers, eliminating the risk of contaminants from important treatments. And together, these important treatments have significantly improved the safety of blood treatments in the UK. And we now see that patients who have a low risk of transiting serious diseases such as hepatitis or HIV. But sadly, we know that treatments in the 70s and 80s put patients at unacceptable risk of contracting serious and life-threatening diseases. We know that in the 70s, people with bleeding disorders had transfusion replacement replaced by the new product of factor concentrate, which was produced by pooling and concentrating tens of thousands of bloods. And as the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire highlighted, just one simple sample was enough to contaminate each entire batch and risk infecting thousands of people and causing that significant concern. And the tragic result of this was that thousands of patients with blood and bleeding disorders were affected with deadly diseases. And for those affected, these diseases had and continue to have huge significant impact on their lives. And without the modern effective treatment, diseases such as HIV were acutely fatal and came with horrific consequences. Now, heartbreakingly, many of those infected had not lived to see the debate today and the prospect of proper justice and the end of this inquiry. The Honourable Member for Kingston upon North highlighted over 3,000 people have died. Statistics from the Terence Higgins Trust highlighted that between the start of the inquiry in July 2017 and February this year, 419 infected people have died. And while we wait for the conclusion of this report and inquiry, one person dies every 4 days. This is about the human element of this inquiry and why every day we delay this compensation is justice denied to those people. And the impact of this scandal goes beyond the immediate medical concerns. My honourable friend, the member for Warrington North, highlighted the stigma. We must remember the stigma of those with HIV and AIDS, which they suffered during the 80s and 90s, with often disgraceful racist and homophobic stereotypes perpetrated widely, and the victims prosecuted and shunned while suffering with this horrific disease. And the disease associated with contaminated blood often impacts not just the immediate victim, but their families and friends. As I said, as a primary care for my late mother, I remember some of those challenges in the late 90s, making sure my mum got the right treatment when she was suffering. And I know that the many victims of those loved ones have gone through similar challenges in trying to get the right treatment, whilst they are often misunderstood and continue to be stigmatised by this disease. Now, I know that the inquiry is finally coming to a close, and the interim payments have begun to be made, so it would be remiss of me to preempt the recommendations of this inquiry. However, I hope that the Minister's heard loudly the concerns raised by a number of members in this afternoon and concerns that have been raised in other debates by members. And I hope that he can fully address some of those clear asks when he responds. As the first ever sickle cell nurse, Dame Elizabeth Anyan, will pointed out, it can be very hard for people suffering with infectious disease and including blood contamination to come forward because of the stigma. Sir Robert's report was published on the 7th of June this year and made 19 clear recommendations. It is frankly disgraceful that only one of those recommendations has been followed up. And Sir Brian acknowledged that it is a moral case for those interim payments to be made. So I'll ask the Minister to respond to a number of those claims in making sure that those victims get the payments they deserved. We can't ignore the impact on the families and friends of who fought alongside for this justice. So can the Minister provide assurances that those groups will not be ignored when the government finally responds to the inquiry? The contaminated blood scandal had life-changing impacts on tens of thousands of victims who were promised the hope of effective treatment, and it can be only right that they see the justice that they deserved as soon as possible.
Minister Alex Burghardt.
Thank you, Dame Angela. It's a pleasure